All right. So today I have with me Sam Bremner. He is the founder of iVest, which is a licensing consumer products private equity firm. I'm really just going to let him introduce himself because he's most likely going to do it a lot better than what I would be able to do. But either way, I'm super stoked to have you on, Sam.
Great to be here. Yeah, so I'm Sam Bremner, co-founder, managing partner of iVest Consumer Partners, private equity firm, but it's a private equity firm focused on a really hot topic. Licensing is a huge business, $169 billion. So we're hoping to deploy $2 billion over the next 5 years to licensed product companies, and that includes companies that own IP, intellectual property. We own Care Bears, for example, which is intellectual property, and royalties businesses, as well as people who make products for branded consumer companies. You wanted to talk about licensing as a adjunct to B2B. How can licensing help those companies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't think about, B2B, but according to a B2B buying report, 78% of B2B buyers only select products from brands they already recognize and trust, right? So how could licensing help that? So a lot of people, they have ideas, they have products, they have services. What they could do is license a brand that could help them gain that trust. And so, B2B buyers are more risk averse than ever, using licensed evergreen brand or trusted corporate name, which by the way is a $95 billion segment, corporate licensing. So it acts as a seal of approval, right? So it shortens the sales cycle because trust is already built in because you have the name. You're not just selling a widget, you're selling reliability, a name like Caterpillar, Honeywell, or Boeing. So for instance, if you're making air conditioners, for institutional air conditioning, whatever, why not license, Honeywell, or in some cases, Black and Decker or Boeing. Companies like this are looking for more royalties revenue potentially. They just have to trust that, you're going to provide a high quality service. So it's a really big category. I'd love to talk more about it.
Yeah, super interesting, and definitely I think category that's not talked about as much. If you were to let's go back a step. If you were to sort of describe what licensing is in as simple a format as possible, I guess, so that everyone just starts at the same point and just understand from there, and then I'd love to dive into the actual mechanics of it.
I would say licensing, the simplest way to say it is like borrowing the credibility of someone else's name. We all have emotional connections to our friends and to things that we like and to our values. And we like to associate with friends that we like because they make us feel good. We respect them. We trust them. When you have an introduction from somebody that you just instantly gives the other person more credibility than a cold introduction. And I would say licensing a brand is like an introduction from a friend, or it's like a friend, because those brands that you can trust them and you can trust your friends. So licensing is a really important part of business and have the credibility for the people that have the name. What often they don't think about is what I would call an asset light strategy, which is, if you are a really well-known company and you make a specific product that everyone trusts you for, maybe you could get into other product lines, but instead of building and tooling and manufacturing those other products, you could find a manufacturer that's really good at creating those products and then license your name and your brand to those products and have that manufacturer give you royalties. So think about 7 to 12% of whatever the gross sales are for that business. It's an asset light strategy. So it's no capital expenditure on your part, and it's 95% gross margin for you, and you build out a new product line. Now, if that product line becomes incredibly successful, you could just take it back and manufacture it yourself. But a great way to get started would be to have someone else make it. And so that's from both the perspective of someone who has the IP, that is the credibility, the friend, and then for those that don't have a name that people know, that do have a great product, why not go to someone who has a great name and say, hey, I'll pay you royalties so that I can leverage your credibility and trust with consumers or with businesses. And really businesses are like consumers too, right? Does that
Interesting. Yeah, I think that actually clarifies it.
like for your podcast, I mean, this is a ridiculous, well, no, it's not. For your podcast, you say you go to Bloomberg and say, "Hey, look, I'm going to do a tech or I'm going to do a licensing podcast and I'm going to pay you on whatever I make. I'll give you 12% Bloomberg. Just allow me to say it's a Bloomberg podcast." So that's a stretch, right? Because they could probably do that
Yeah.
themselves. But maybe there's somebody out there that isn't in the news business, but does have a credible name. Like, well, somebody that doesn't have any podcasts or any online media material. So you go to a company that does have, like, a newspaper. They're an old school newspaper, but they have a lot of credibility and people know it. And you say, "Hey, look, I'm going to do live media, YouTube podcasts on business. License me your brand, and you will make X revenue percentage of what I'm doing." So it's like, well, they think to themselves, do I want to get into the podcast business, or do I want to have him invest his time and money developing it and he can pay me royalties?
And it's not actually, I guess, that far off like a franchise model even. It sort of has some of the same mechanics to it. Obviously, it's different in the sense that it's like, typically, I guess, consumer brands. What brands or what industries or types of businesses do you see this type of model actually working best for?
So the biggest component of the $369 billion licensing industry is called character entertainment. Character entertainment, character animation, entertainment really covers about 140 billion of the 369 billion. And what that is, think about Harry Potter. Harry
Mhm.
Potter was a movie, but Warner Brothers created a $7 billion licensing company out of it, licensing products. Warner Brothers didn't want to go out and make magic wands and top hats and all the other accessories. They went to other manufacturers and they said, "Hey, you're really good at making this stuff. We'll license the Harry Potter IP to you, and you will go to Walmart and say, 'Hey, Walmart, we'd like to create a big shelf of Harry Potter merchandise manufactured by trusted manufacturers who you know.'" So that's, Marvel, Star Wars, huge industry. Another part, a big component, as I mentioned, corporate licensing. So Starbucks sells coffee related products at Costco. Starbucks does not make those coffee cups. Starbucks goes to a trusted manufacturer and says, "Hey, I want to license my corporate brand to you to make cups, and then I want to sell them to Costco so that people can have, more merchandise related to my corporate brand." And for Starbucks, I mean, they're in the coffee store business selling coffee. They're busy
Yes.
with that. Let someone else go through all the headache of manufacturing, shipping, distribution to Walmart, and I'll just take a royalty off of it. And then if the
Yeah.
business grows substantially, maybe Starbucks gets into the coffee cup business, but probably not. So that's corporate
Yeah.
licensing. And we talk about if you're B2B and you're selling, you know, outdoor furniture for big events, concerts and things like that. So you're selling the chairs, you're selling the tarps, the outdoor weather protection devices and things like that, and you're just a guy, leasing that out. Why not lease a name that is synonymous with trust in and around that business, and give your name? So you mentioned multi-unit franchise. That's another huge category. So multi-unit franchise restaurants, gyms, coffee stores, um, all kinds of tool rental companies, multi-unit franchise. You want to rent tools? There's big, huge multi-unit franchise companies that do that, car rental companies. So yeah, that's those are the main segments of licensed product.
How did you actually end up in the licensing and like this space?
Well, private equity is a big business, but it's actually smaller than bonds, smaller than public markets, smaller than real estate. It's a big investment category. There's over $4 trillion in private equity investments, but it's
Mhm.
actually kind of small relative. So having been in the business for decades, having worked for big private equity firms, Carlyle, for example, what I realized is that you've got to have a new mousetrap. You've got to have a reason for being. It can't just be because you have $30 billion to invest. And the problem is that a lot of people, that's all they have. They just have capital and they figure that's enough. But what research shows for the last decade or so, that if you have experts in a specific industry deploying capital for you and driving growth, that is the key to getting outsized returns. And so we are all licensed product experts. We're operators, business operators. I mean, I had 100 employees when I was 18 years old. I've started many businesses, sold many businesses, and now deploying institutional capital for large size companies and trying to improve those and grow them. And licensing is a asset light, CapEx light way to get more EBITDA and more earnings and more top line. So we apply it as a revenue generator, profit generator to everything that we do. And we've gotten incredible outsized returns. We had a restaurant franchise. We had a frozen food franchise that we took from 400 to 2,400 stores and made our investors 8 times their money
Massive.
by
Yeah.
licensing.
Interesting. So franchising is actually a type of licensing.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's not the first time that I've heard that, in private, like in the private equity space, that the more you can sort of have knowledge and have skills and expertise that you can deploy in the businesses that you invest into, the better the entire outcome. Also, the easier it is to actually find the good investments, because you're going to be much more interesting for them if they can also see, okay, these guys actually have a lot of knowledge and skills to also deploy into the business. So it makes a huge amount of sense. And honestly, also what we see like with the businesses that we work with, the ones that are like niche down. For example, we help it is an M&A firm, but sort of the mechanics are similar, where they reach out, like they're specialized in healthcare, but more specifically in like centers. So like very specific, and they literally have people on their team that have like built up and sold exactly those types of businesses, which makes it, like gives them a huge amount of leverage when they then actually, invest in or actually make the deals. So what side of it are you then on? Are you on like, I guess your clients are then the larger brands that actually, so for example, the coffee chain that that's essentially who you invest into and help utilize or leverage these tactics.
Yeah. The companies, well, we're on both sides. So we own intellectual property that we license to other people that pay us royalties. I'll give you an example, Care Bears. So Care Bears TV show, people have known it for decades. It's touched billions of lives. And we make over 600 products that people can purchase related to Care Bears. And those companies are experts in manufacturing those products and have great relationships with all the retailers. And what they do is, based on our approvals, they go ahead and manufacture those things, they sell them at retail, and we collect a royalty. On the other side of things, own companies that manufacture products and then pay royalties to other companies. So think about a Star Wars lamp, Mandalorian lamp, which I love that product. And we're not experts in that. The company is an expert in that. They license Star Wars brand and make those lamps. So we're on both sides of it. We understand it very, very clearly. And from a B2B perspective, which is what you were really interested in, you think about SaaS model, software as a service, it could be licensed instead of like making it, building it. Like if you create a great industrial product, you can go. So for instance, let's say you come up with some construction or industrial related product. Why not go to Caterpillar, for instance, that has an incredibly trusted brand in construction, and say, hey, Caterpillar, I've patented this technology in industry. It really, really works, a great product, but nobody knows Sam Bremner. Why don't I pay you a royalty of 10, 12% on every single unit that I sell to the construction industry? And then they think to themselves, well, why not? What does it cost them? It costs them nothing, as long as it doesn't hurt their reputation or ruin their brand in any way.
Yeah,
It's a great,
exactly.
again, it's that license. B2B licensing play is big. Ingredient branding is the ultimate B2B licensing play. And let me tell you how that works. The next wave of B2B growth is ingredient licensing, like think Gore-Tex, right? Or Intel, right? Those are brands that you know and you trust. But did you think about what do you know Gore-Tex for? You know it for strength, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what if you take Gore-Tex brand and you license it to pet products? What do dogs do? They rip things apart, but they can't rip apart a Gore-Tex thing. So if you're looking for dog toys, Gore-Tex dog toys, and use that in the brand. So that's actually a licensed brand. And I think a company that we're investing in is doing something like that. So, and you think about Intel, anything related to computers. So, if you're doing anything related to computer and you license Intel's brand, if you can get the license, that's the hard part, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you license superior component to a consumer brand. It's a win-win. The consumer brand gets a performance boost. The B2B company gets a massive market reach out without ever even having to manage the retail shelf or do any of the manufacturing.
So what's actually your process? Because as you mentioned, I can imagine it's not that easy. Like, what's actually your process for actually getting these licensing deals like across the line and actually like rolling? Maybe both that and actually spotting them in the first place. Like, what could be a really good licensing strategy for this specific business?
Well, that's where, it's really important you have people that have a lot of experience because I've got experience across every sector of business. And as it pertains to licensing, we have an internal process and a know-how that we've developed internally that it's our secret sauce. So look, I mean, we're actively looking for investments. We want to deploy 2 billion over the next 5 years. So we're looking at businesses continually and we're looking for businesses that are successful. But if you add licensing strategy on top of what they're doing, would be way more successful. And what we do is we make offers for these businesses to collaborate with the founders, usually, who roll equity, and we buy into these businesses, usually control equity. We write checks between 25 and 150 million for companies that are over 10 million EBITDA, so they're substantial, usually close to 100 million in revenue. But before we close the deal, we've already got a full licensing strategy built out for them. We've often shared that with them, got their buy-in to it, and we value the company based on what the future growth is going to look like. But we're getting a discount because when you overlay what we can do to grow the business, it's much more substantial.
Interesting. And then I guess on the other side, how do you actually get out? Like, how do you find these businesses that would be a good fit for you to invest in and deploy these strategies into?
Well, this is why I'm doing the podcast, because it's hard to find. You're trying to connect with businesses. You're trying to connect with owners. Owners are busy people and they're getting their news, they're getting their information, online and on their cell phone. 60% of, Gen Z purchasing is on their cell phone, right? So you've got to you got to go where the people are. And I think podcasts like yours that are innovative, youthful, energetic. There's a lot of people your age that have started businesses that are killing it right now. Look, I can give you a couple of names. Comfort, COMFRT. They make sweatshirts. Okay. And it's a brand actually that you would probably resonate with, but they are doing, I think they have like $1 billion valuation. And they've only been around for 3 or 4 years. And if you told me getting in the sweatshirt business is what you wanted to do, I'd tell you you're nuts. And there's enough, the Gap, there's enough sweatshirts and apparel. But these guys, they've created a brand for themselves. Another one is Groons. Groons is a gummy company. Again, 2-3 years ago, it's doing 300 million in revenue. How do you do that? There's lots of gummies out there. So I guess my point is that it's hard to find. Got to get out there and connect with people.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's also a relatively niche. Like it's quite a specific type of business that you're looking for. Even more specific than something like, what I shared before, like a specific type of healthcare clinic or healthcare, it's probably harder to define and harder to actually find those as well. But I
So
guess
there's only
it's,
tens of thousands. I mean, relative to every business, like businesses the size that we invest in, there's probably 50,000, under 100,000 total.
yeah. And you invest in the US?
Yeah, it's primarily US investments. And we do own a company in London called Palido. We own Cloudco in Los Angeles. We Cool, which makes really cool slime sets. And we own a plush company, one of the biggest plush companies in the world, Dandy International. And that's based in LA as well as Guangzhou, China, has a huge design center there. But, back to your point about corporate, B2B licensing, $95 billion corporate licensing space, that's where the real smart money is going. Finding ways to leverage relatively dormant corporate brands and then finding new revenue generation through new B2B offerings. It's something that I'm personally focused on.
So
High margin,
actually,
long-term.
in relation to that, like, what's the thing in 2026 that you're like you're putting, 80% of your focus on, or putting most of your focus on, or doubling down on in 2026?
Royalties businesses, companies that have own IP, people that own IP. When you own intellectual property, whether it's software, whether it's healthcare, whether it's industrial, you know what you have to do? You have to create product that sells to other people in order to create royalties. So, new product innovation, digital marketing, and brand building, that's the focus for me and in our firm. Royalties are a spectacular business. It's a great business. Music royalties, everybody knows about. The movie business, people know about, but they don't often think about corporate licensing, B2B licensing. And those examples I could go on and on about, Black& Decker, right? Great brand. Everybody knows it. Do they make kitchen appliances? Yeah, they do. Do they license their brand to other adjacent categories? Yes. They do tools, but do they do every tool? Or are there some tools they don't make themselves and they just license the brand and collect the royalties? And in fact, that's the case. Honeywell, same thing. They're licensing Starbucks, I mentioned already. So it's a creative industry, creative product development, creative storytelling, and it's a great capital light business that can generate huge profits.
What's then that might be the same thing. What's like the biggest constraint that you're seeing right now?
Well, it's difficult. It's difficult to find investments that are great quality. That's the constraint for me. And that's why for us, I mean, we're doing a lot of outreach, and that outreach is generating great results because there are people around the world, they're sitting there thinking, I don't want to sell my company, but I have everything is tied up. I'm a private company. It's all tied up in this one thing. Maybe I could get a partner, somebody who could help me take some money off the table, help grow the business with their capital so I don't have to worry about everything myself. And that's where we come in. And I'm hoping that people resonate with what I'm saying and go, that guy seems reasonable. If I had his capital, that would be comfortable. I could work with that guy. He's got good ideas, and that's what I'm selling. I'm selling capital and a partner who, you can work with, somebody who, you can collaborate with. And because look, the biggest mistake people make in private equity choosing a partner is not really analyzing who the partner is. Sure, they have $1 billion. They have 5, they have 10 billion, 20 billion, but who are you dealing with? Because believe me, when you take an investment from somebody, you're going to have a very intimate relationship. You're going to find out a lot of things about maybe you didn't want to know. And it can be very challenging, especially for entrepreneurs who have been running their businesses by themselves, primarily as the only governance decision maker. Governance is crucial. How you structure it, how you make decisions. People think about governance as like who's in charge, but it's not who's in charge so much as it is how do you make the decisions. Process. Setting up process is something entrepreneurs aren't usually that accustomed to. The really successful ones are, but it's all about process.
Yeah, 100%. What's like what's your perspective on, is that processes that you see as the factor that actually separates the businesses that scale from the businesses that stall, or never actually reach the scale that they actually desire? Or what do you see as like in your perspective as the thing that actually separates companies from scaling with companies that end up just stalling, or never actually reaching scale?
You just hit on it. It's all about process. I was just talking to an entrepreneur who was so successful, his business peaked and he hit bankruptcy. And you think, well, how is it you could be successful and hit bankruptcy? Well, when you're growing like crazy, you have to put all your money back in. So you're not generating cash that just sits on the balance sheet. The cash gets poured back in to support the growth. You have to order more product. You have to order supplies, inputs to your manufacturing, right? And then you have to scale. He bought a new manufacturing plant. He bought new equipment, and he failed to achieve great process. And so as a result of not having a really thoughtful process, he had breakdowns in manufacturing that cost him. He had breakdowns in packaging that cost him. Service providers let him down, but the contracts did not include penalties for the company that did the poor or substandard work. And when he bought the building, there was mistakes. And there wasn't processes and governance to avoid human error. And that is the most important part of it. You've got to have, as you scale, you have to eliminate human error by, double redundancies and processes that ensure that things don't get left behind or dropped. And that's what caused his bankruptcy. It was a culmination of all those mistakes. Outside service providers letting him down, mistakes on the new building, mistakes on the equipment, and mistakes on the manufacturing that new employees made. And so I asked the question, well, what was your process? And it was all seat of the pants. I mean, the man who runs this business, he's a triathlete. He runs, 50 and 100-kilometer races. So he's got grit and determination. But grit and determination doesn't work in business in the way that you would think. Like, yes, go, go, go is a good thing. But in business, what you want to do is go, test, and change your approach. And so to him, I said, look, it's like
Refine.
running
Yeah.
down and then running down a different trail and figure out which one's easier. In business, you don't just use grit and keep going, because if you're compounding mistakes, grit is going to hurt you.
But yeah, that is so true. Like, it's next to impossible to actually scale a business if you know if you don't have proper processes in place, because every time, as you mentioned, like every time you actually onboard a new person, it leaves so much room for error if you don't have the right processes in place. And at the same time, I sort of look at processes like it's essentially just trying to make the different processes, different tasks within the business as easy to follow as possible, so that they take up as little mental bandwidth as possible and leave as little margin for error as possible, which then actually gives you back time and mental bandwidth to actually spend on the stuff that is harder to put into processes that actually, has more leverage. But if you have all of these smaller tasks, all of these small processes or mistakes that you like constantly make, it's just next to impossible to actually spend the time on the stuff that actually moves the needle and actually provides leverage in the business.
Yeah. Digital and AI integration is also B2B licensing issue as well, because, auditing, the friction when so people, are manufacturing a product for you and you've given the name to them, they're licensing your name. How do you know that they're paying you what they owe you?
Mhm.
And what's really cool about AI integration now is it's getting rid of the friction for B2B licensing in the audit process. So AI and automated royalty tracking is the newest thing, and B2B licensing is becoming like a seamless subscription. And Roblox, for instance, which is a really huge kids video game with, I think, 40 million users a day. You can license their brand. You can license your brand to them, but you can do it all online, and it's all B2B. Excuse me, yeah, B2B, and
Mhm.
AI is handling the subscription and the tracking, and so usage-based licensing in real time, which is a massive unlock for industrial and tech companies.
Yeah, like AI gives you so much leverage if you're able to think in processes already. It makes it so much easier to actually, also scale your processes. But it's sort of if you don't really have that mindset and skill set of actually thinking in processes, AI doesn't really give you that much like leverage in it. When you do, it makes it so much easier with processes like that, where it used to be a manual process where now you can suddenly automate it, and leave almost no error or no margin for error. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Well, if you're a software company, or anything digitally related, AI can track usage. So if I could set up AI to track all of your podcasts. If I licensed my name to you and you're using my name in your podcast, AI can then track and audit how often you say my name and therefore pay me
Yeah.
per, that's the sort of thing I mean, it's a great way to reduce the friction, and we all know what you owe and that's what you pay. And auditing is something very few people ever talk about, but in the digital world and software world, auditing is crucial. How many times did people download the software from you, and you owe me a piece of that royalties? The music business, for the most part, has got it figured out, a lot of it, but AI is really helping the music business track those royalties as well.
Yeah. It gives you so much. It leaves so many new opportunities to actually improve things. Sam, it was like really interesting to actually understand more about especially I think the licensing space. And as you mentioned, like it's such a huge like sector, and honestly, just a really great idea that I think a lot of businesses will like be left with a similar mindset. Should there be any businesses that wanted to reach out to you or follow what you're building, what would be the best place for them to actually follow along?
Well, you can see me on LinkedIn, you can follow me there, but you could also email me, sam@ivesconsumer. If you have a business and you're interested in talking to somebody who could potentially help grow it faster, I'm all ears. I'd love to talk. And it doesn't have to be a deal. A lot of times we work with companies for years before we get a deal done. And several examples of that. One, we participated in an auction process to buy a business. Another bidder outbid us, but they didn't close the deal. We went back, we introduced them to an operating partner, someone who had a lot of experience running that kind of business. And that operating partner from iVest ran that business for 2 years, doubled EBITDA, and now we're buying that business. So we work with people, honestly, for a long, long time to make these deals happen, right?
Amazing. Sam, thanks a lot for joining.
Great. It was great to be here.